All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dane Madrigal, and today I will be lecturing on Pierre Boulez's Les Marteaux sans motet. I'm going to be discussing a portion of the ninth movement, Bel Édifice et les Prosottaments. Uh, and basically, I want to give a little bit of a preface to this to discuss why I'm going to be talking about what I am talking about. So obviously in our counterpoint class, we've been talking about counterpoint as a texture and as a technique. We've talked about it in the ideas of the Renaissance and the Baroque in such usages such as canon, imitation in the canon, canons at different intervallic levels, the fugue, the invention, the species, everything we've been talking about, basically. And why today I will not be talking about any of that within this piece. So, Boulez, as a conductor and as a composer, was obviously a very opinionated person, as some might know, and he had quite a bit of revile for the Second Viennese School. Though he thoroughly believed in serialism and he employed it integrally in his compositions, one of the greatest downfalls he saw in Schoenberg, Webern, and the Second Viennese School as a whole was their adherence or trying to use in some semblance the classical forms that they had inherited from the Western art music traditions, especially that of the canon or that of sonata. And similar in a Beethoven-esque fashion, Boulez was out to destroy the sonata, and people will ask, well, how is this possible, and how is he operating in this context? And as some might know, and we talked about in History 5, the 12-tone operating system of musical composition is somewhat incompatible, if not just totally incompatible, with our systems of music operation in our Western art language of music. And Boulez, I believe to some degree, did understand that, and which is why the mathematical complexity of his compositions lend more to a sense of formal analysis gesturally through melodic and rhythmic cells than anything else. And his melodic and rhythmic cells, especially in this piece, which is a landmark of Western music composition, are derived from things that theorists have called PDAs, which are pitch duration associations, which is the idea of in integral serialism that certain pitches will only be played for certain durations, and though it isn't present in every movement here in Les Marteaux sans motet, it is present in some of the movements, and since I'm going to be discussing movement 9, the melodic and rhythmic quotations that he's using will sometimes implement this. But what I'm trying to get at here is I will not be discussing this unless it particularly is poignant to the pitch class and how it relates to intervals that are going to be formed with it. And also another technique that he used in this composition was complex and simple multiplication of sets, which is the idea of taking tetrachordal sets from a theoretical row that is being used in portions of this musical piece, and using these tetrachordal sets to be paired in some mathematical way through multiplication, using matrices in which there would be square multiplications of sets that would be able to have pitch class derivatives that would equal to a Tn, apparently, and this Tn would be the melodic cell that then could then be used in derogations. So in a way, he also is not only destroying canonic imitative forms, he's destroying the sonata form, he's also now destroyed the way in which we're able to formulaically look at the music, and he's destroyed tonality. So this gets pretty far away from what we've studied so far in class. So I'm going to be doing my best to analyze intervallically the relationships of these notes and see if we can be able to find some semblance of not musicality, but some semblance of counterpoint as far as voice movement. The reason I chose movement 9 is because it's the largest orchestrated portion of the song cycle. If you want the history of it, I might talk about it a little bit at the end, depending on if time allows. But let's just get into it. If we talk about the overall form of this ninth movement, there is this first section here. Most people break it up into 3 portions. I've decided to break it up a little bit further. This first portion does quotations of all pieces of the work up until this point. It goes on for the longest duration. There's a small solo, flute solo, the alto flute in G, and then it continues for another portion of quotation and expansion through the multiplication of the interval sets, the squaring of the tetrachords, and then it goes into one more flute solo, and then it does a last recapitulation where it has pitch material that is very unique only to this ninth movement, and then a small cadenza by the flute. So, if we're deciding to talk about any section, I believe we should start from the beginning. We'll try to get through as much as we can, and we'll see where we can go from there. So, here we are. Les Marteau sans mutuer bel édifice, et les présentement. I am not good at French, so please excuse me of anything I say today. Anyway, here we go. So if we're looking at this entire motive here, I did some pre-analysis. There is a row that is being formed here. It is a full pitch class row. However, that is totally coincidental mathematically lining up with the pitch cells. But we will talk about the main feature, salient feature of this portion of the piece, and this is this pedal tone of E flat. This pedal tone of E flat is tossed around through parts, and it's given quite a bit of pertinence. That pedal tone then ends here at the encore plus renti. And this section here is what we're going to do a deep dive into first to try and possibly figure out intervallic relationships. So, the E flat in relation to the first pitch that sounds from the viola is an F. That's creating a major second immediately. And we'll just go ahead and analyze this one part up through this system. So we see that it then is given to the E flat, and he now, or the violist, will now carry the pedal tone. If we move on to the voice here, we see the voice first sounds a G natural, making a major second, or major third, my apologies. An F sharp, which is now an augmented second. Where all these intervals I'm talking about are in relation to this pedal. He then goes into a C natural, which is going to make for a major 6 above or a minor third, and then a D natural, which is going to make for a major 7th, minor 2nd. So, when we're looking at, when we're looking at this, we've now analyzed the lower voices in relation to that pedal E. So let's go ahead and analyze the upper voices. We have an unpitched maraca. This little rhythmic figure is important, but not for counterpoint, so we won't discuss that. We'll go immediately up into the xylorimba and vibraphone, as I had just discussed. So the first pitch that we're going to be encountering from that xylorimba is an E natural, which in relation to the E flat is a minor second, and then a D flat, which is going to make for a major second. So if we just look at that first measure there, we can automatically see that Pierre Boulez is manipulating his tetrachordal set classes and duodeco, I believe that's what it is, duodeci tuplet there in this fashion, so that way he's able to provide a sense of growth, since everything is very enclosed within major and minor seconds and augmented seconds, and that one major third we see there. So let's go ahead and move on to the next few pitches of the xylorimba. We have an A natural, which is forming an augmented fourth, and a G sharp, which is forming an augmented third. So interesting for sure, because now we're using more augmented pitches, and they're being juxtaposed against these minor thirds and seconds that are in the voice. But let's now see how we're going to be able to use this next two measures. Something I should have mentioned is that the row that I mentioned that is being used throughout this portion of the composition is a 4-measure row, and it ends right here at the 5/8. And then this row is not repeated anywhere else throughout the composition. So, looking deeply into the counterpoint here, we see that the first pitch that's then struck after this big lunga here is this B flat in the vibraphone. If this were a tonal composition, we could see that there is somewhat of a tonic-dominant relationship going on here. In this case, we could say contrapuntally that he's now moving into a section that's somewhat more of an answer to his subject. If we say that his subject are these major minor seconds and these augmented intervals that give a high amount of crunch. And now we're going to be finding a high amount of consonants. So let's see how he does this. If we don't say that, though, and we just say that this is a coincidence, we can just put into effect the crunch in consonants. So let's see how he does this. Well, let's still say that this B flat up here is in relation to the E flat that is then sounded by the viola, kind of as the pedal tone of this section. Immediately, that's a perfect fifth. Surprise, surprise. A very large amount of consonants coming from these major, or these augmented and minor intervals. Then we have the analysis of the voice part that we'll do very quickly. So we have an A natural that's going to be sounding an augmented fourth. We have a C sharp, which is going to be sounding as an augmented third. We have a B natural that's going to be sounding as an augmented fifth. We now have an F as a major second, a D as a minor seventh, and then this quasi-cry here I won't analyze because these are going to be approximations technically, because this is unpitched but within this pitch area, this portamento. But something interesting regardless, that it would be a third and a unison or an augmented unison per se, but that's something else entirely, so we'll just blacklist it in terms of contrapuntal discussions for this afternoon. We'll then move up to the guitar to analyze what's going on here. Again, interesting, a B natural. So we have that augmentation again, and it's an augmented fifth. So we're kind of in that, even though we're ignoring it, we kind of are in this tonic dominant function, but we're using a tritone with the augmented fourth to begin it, and then we're expanding from there to see where this augmentation can take us. But let's continue to ignore it, since we know that this is an integral serial piece. We then have an F sharp and a G, or my apologies, we have an F sharp and an E. So we have a major, or an augmented second, and then a minor second. A little bit sloppy there, my apologies. Augmented. There we go. So now we have these seconds that are coming into play, so we can see already with these lower voices that there's a good amount of augmentation that's going on within this measure 3, and then we have a good amount of seconds and sevenths going on in the lower voices in the fourth measure. So if we continue up to the upper voices, we have that F sharp again that we had just seen, making that augmented second here, again an augmented interval in measure 3. We still have the B flat that's sustaining, which gives us the perfect fifth, and then we have this F sharp above, the augmented second. And then now if we look to this last chord that's kind of struck by the keyed percussion up at the top, we have a perfect fourth with the A flat, a perfect fifth with the B flat, a major third with the G, and a minor sixth with the C. So, if we're looking at this piece, kind of dividing it from this point right here, we see that in relation to the pedal E flat, we have a strong amount of crunchy harmony here in measures 1 and 2, a big force of augmented harmony here in measure 3, and then returning to the minor harmony that's kind of accented with more crunch in the minor seconds and minor sevenths and the augmented seconds in measure 4. However, if we look at the upper part, we see that there's a bigger portion of expansion with the minor major second to the augmented fourth and third. We then have perfect intervals that are juxtaposed with augmented seconds before reaching a totally consonant chord with the pedal E flat from the perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major second, or major third, and minor sixth. And now if we look at it as a whole, we see somewhat of an interesting relation here. We see that there is a good amount of this minor contrapuntal harmony taking place in measure 1, minor going into a juxtaposed augmented harmony in measure 2. Now augmented harmony is being overtaken here with the perfect harmony as well. And then here in this final measure, we have a combination of the minor harmony, the augmented harmony, only with one interval though, and a big amount of consonant harmony. So we could say that this is the most consonant measure of this entire system. But let's see how it plays out in relation to the next system. And we can also say, though, that through this observation we have seen the crunch and consonance relationship. So if we continue to move on, we're going to see something interesting right away if we do a little bit of a zoom out. If we just kind of look at the gestural form here, we can see that it's somewhat palindromic, where this gesture is then, I just realized I wasn't using the pointer, this gesture here by the voice then kind of comes into a palindrome with one of those tetrachordal inversions of an interval class, I believe that's 6 removed from the original interval class here, and then it immediately stops at the 3/8. So what I will think that we should do as a contrapuntal analysis is analyze this chord here in measure 5, and then the relation of the voice being the main gestural or the main gesture in this section of 3 measures, in relation to the alto or the viola that has now overtaken the original guitar E flat pedal that is being used as the basis, I believe, for most of the harmonies here in the tetrachordal series. So let's go ahead and analyze this chord. We know that we had a, if we're talking about this hypothetically as if it were a tonal composition, we had the E flat operating as a tonic, the B flat entering as a dominant, and now we have the tonic entering once again as the solo pitch. So we can see that there is a good formal relation of about how he is using these intervals to show different bits of harmonic development that are going on within the integral serialism. So even you cannot escape from harmony, Mr. Pierre Boulez. So let us look here. So an interesting feature is that we have a double stop pizz played by the alto, the viola. I'll just, from now on, if I say alto, please know that I am discussing about the viola specifically as it is marked in the score. Boulez writes a G flat in relation there, so that's a minor third in relation to that E flat. He then has an F sharp in the voice, creating that augmented second, a B natural, making for a diminished fifth, and then a G natural, making for a major third. C natural, minor 6. F natural, major second. B flat, perfect fifth. A natural, I am so sorry, diminished fourth. There we go. So now that we're looking at these interval classes here in relation to this pedal, we see that from the last large consonant chord that we had initiated, where it was much more of a consonant harmony, especially in the keyed percussion, we now have somewhat more of a dissonant harmony. Obviously, we have the diminished fourth, we have the minor sixth, which still is a form of consonants, but obviously the minor side, the diminished fifth, the augmented second. So we have these intervals now that are representing themselves to show a shift palindromically from this major harmony going into a less dissonant one. So if we look at the voice, we're going to see obviously this C sharp, which is creating this augmented sixth, a minor second with the E. The D becomes a minor second as well. The A, that diminished fourth we were talking about. The G now brings a major third, but we can see that there's a measure break here. And then a B natural, whoopsie, augmented fifth. So we can see the relationship there. And what we're seeing now is this large amount of augmented intervals once more. We see that there's going to be a good amount of augmentation that's being used in this portion, especially now with the voice. Something else that we can get out of this is the fact that he is using the augmented intervals as a basis of compositional technique here, where he's using them kind of as the silver lining between the consonant harmonies and between the dissonant harmonies. His reasoning for this, I'm not totally sure, but we can see that it's definitely evident, because even in the measures of transition that he's using in this first portion here at the top, we see that this augmented harmony is what's carrying throughout. The minor harmony is also doing some sort of fashion to move harmonically forward within the serialism, but I don't believe that it's giving so much weight as the augmented harmony, because there's definitely a fine line between where this augmented harmony is bridging the dissonance and the consonants. So if we keep looking through this section of movement 9, we're going to see other portions where there's going to be harmony that can be influenced or created through the counterpoint. But obviously, because of the integral serialism, Boulez is obviously avoiding large portions of this. Some sections that I feel that we should take a look at, though, are measures 17 here up until 20. So we'll mark this with a star. I would say we should look at measures 15 and 16 and 14 before. The problem is, though, is because of the pitch indeterminacy, we should say that the singer is doing a B flat here, but studying contemporary vocal technique, this is more of a suggestion for register than anything else. And then continuing on, there's lots of portions of tempi changes that are going on in relation to other specific portions of the piece and movements, which are obviously highly influential for the overall formal analysis, you could say, but as far as a harmonic formal analysis, they don't pertain too much. And then another portion of the piece that I believe we should be analyzing harmonically and contrapuntally is from 48 here up until 56 here, and that covers most of the themes of the other sections. There's other sections that we could analyze harmonically, but obviously the texture becomes not only thicker, but it's relying much more, you can see, on homorhythmic, homophonic harmony. So it becomes more or less of a functional game of trying to pick out serially how he's moving, as opposed to these other sections that I had mentioned, where there's definitely voice leading going on between the voices, more so in the first bit that I had mentioned at 17. And because of time constrictions, obviously, I think what I'll do is analyze just this one section for you guys, so that way you can see definitely how the voices are moving, especially because you can see that there's some liveliness going on here. So at this point, he's quoting the third movement, which is a part of cycle 2 of this larger cycle. So if we just go ahead and analyze these 4 voices we have in play: the xylophone, the xylorimba, the vibraphone, the guitar, and the alto, the viola. So if we look here, we have obviously voices that are moving somewhat homorhythmically. We have the xylophone, the guitar, the alto. You can see that their gestures are all lining up with each other. But you can also see that there's a big person standing out. Tremolo. And tremolo on what pitch? You guessed it. E flat. So now he's using the tetrachordal analysis of his multiplication integral theory for making these double sets and forming over the gesture of movement 3 with movement 1. And so contrapuntally now, even though he's not using any of the gesture texturally other than here in this last bit here with this triplet from movement 1, he's using the other gestures now to show a contrapuntal relationship to movement 3. So let's go ahead and do an analysis of how he's doing that contrapuntally just through this small portion here. If I have time, I'll try to get into this section here, because now he's doing a quotation of section 4, movement 4. But we'll just try to go over this system. So you can obviously see that this is an extremely dense contrapuntal work when we're talking about the relations between the forms of each of the sections, the overall piece, and the miniature cycles that are in between. And I definitely think a better way for analyzing this piece would have been doing integral serial analysis of it. But, obviously for counterpoint, the best that we can get is by analyzing the motifs and gestures that he's using from other movements in relation to pitch class variable sets that he's getting from these doubly squared tetrachords. So let's go ahead and take a look. So we're going to kind of use this alto as this resonating bass that we're going to analyze in relation to everybody else as far as voices go. So immediately he starts with this D flat here, and in D flat in relation to an E natural. It's already an interesting choice because that's no longer allowing for a major second but an augmented second. But if we remember from before, this augmented second is going to be the basis of how he's manipulating consonant and dissonant harmonies contrapuntally. Immediately then he does a G natural in relation to an F natural. If we're still taking this G natural as the base, this would be a minor seventh, but since this F is resonating below, that's making it a major second. We then have a G sharp and an A natural. This G sharp A natural, minor second. We then have a B flat and an F sharp, creating an augmented fifth. And then we have a G natural and an E flat, which is creating for a minor sixth. So definitely interesting that this augmented interval is still the pivot between the minor harmonies and even that major second. And we also see that the alto is now bringing into its pitch combinations the E flat that's being used as the pedal tone for this contrapuntal harmony. Now if we keep analyzing the guitar and the alto linearly through this free counterpoint, Oh, I guess that is something I should mention. So all the counterpoint that I'm talking about here, contextually in retrospective, is all free counterpoint, since it's not necessarily following any strict forms such as the species imitation of the classical forms of counterpoint. So these are things to take into consideration when I'm discussing all of this intervallic harmony in relation to the counterpoint and how it's influencing the movement's formal structures within this last movement. The best way to define this is free counterpoint. So anyway, this linear lines here, we're going to keep analyzing them. So like I said, we have this E flat that's now acting as the pedal tone from movement 1 in relation to these gestures of the quintuplet, and then this last divided 4 16th notes from movement 2. So I guess I should put this here, movement 3 gesture, and movement 2 gesture. And we're seeing that it's in relation to this movement 1 gesture. Anyway, if we go here, we have an A with this E flat creating augmented fourth. So again, we have that pivot interval. Now we have this F with this C sharp making an augmented fourth. And then we have this F sharp with this B, which is making for a perfect fifth. So we see now this augmented interval is leading us to this perfect consonance. The same consonance that we were observing here. So again, we have this motion of minor to augmented to perfect. It is being carried throughout this entire duration here. And though we didn't analyze it because un peu plus lente is actually interval class vector 6 semitones removed from this original interval class vector. We could have obviously analyzed it like I had discussed, but it removes itself pretty vigorously, kind of as a developmental portion of the integral serialism that Boulez is formulating at this portion. So, like again, another reason to reinforce why we're going over this system specifically. But to restate what I was saying, the augmented second is still being used here as the transportive modem to get from this dissonant harmony to this consonant harmony that we're going to be seeing. So, continuing on linearly through the free counterpoint, we then have an F with a C sharp, which is creating augmented intervals again. We then have grace notes that are acting in tandem with each other between B and C, which is a major seventh. And then we have G sharp acting with G natural, a minor second, and C sharp acting with G, a diminished fifth. So we see now that the arc kind of this contrapuntal harmony, if we're saying that this is consonance here and this is dissonance here, we can see that it's kind of moving in this gesture like this. It hits this perfect fifth kind of at the middle, thinking that we're going to be taking a turn this way, but instead we start a descent down. Just something to think about contrapuntally. And now as we're looking at this harmony, I have a harmonic played, obviously by the, there we go, by the viola. And we see that it's a G in relation to this G sharp, so again, minor second harmony, a C to an F sharp, creating for an augmented harmony, and we've returned back to the pedal tone of the E flat in relation to an F, a consonant harmony, a major second. The same consonant harmony that we saw being implemented after an augmented interval from the beginning. Something to think about. And then now the viola, quiet, guitar, sounding the A flat in relation to the G. Whoopsie. There we go. A seventh. So, we see definitely that we thought we were making this type of arch. We've now made this type of arch. he's fooled us and subverted our expectations from the previous time he was using the gesture of the E flat as a pedal tone from movement 1 in strict relation to that movement, moving to a more consonant harmony to moving to a more dissonant harmony. But if we remember from this first portion, the consonants did not come from the guitar, the voice, and the alto, but came from the keyed percussion. So now we're going to see if the pedal tone from this keyed percussion here in the vibraphone in relation to the xylophone can bring some sort of consonance that we had been expecting. So immediately we have a unison here, a perfect unison, a perfect fifth, a major third, an A is an augmented fourth, and a D, a minor second. So we had these perfect and major intervals here, which was giving us the expectation that we had desired. So let's see how this continues. We have an augmented third, augmented fourth, and then a minor sixth. So we see that the augmented interval is now being used in tandem with the augmented interval of the guitar. Let's see where we can go with this. An augmented fourth to a perfect fifth, an augmented second to a minor second. We're now using this juxtaposition of the augmentations to show us where we could be going within the consonant harmony. Again, one more time, the sounding A, the sounding G, and the sounding B flat. So what this does show is that there is a good amount of consonant harmony that's actually being used at this point in time within the keyed percussion, which is not so far removed again from this section that we had analyzed at the beginning of the ninth movement. But we see here now that we're using motives and gestures from movement 1, movement 2, and movement 3 to be able to show that there is some bit of contrapuntal relation between the counterpoint of the pedal tone inside the vibraphone, extremely high in its register, in relation to the other keyboard percussion, and in relation to the guitar and alto. And if we're just looking strictly in this section at how the voices are moving in relation to each other, we can see that we have contrary motion in these voices as pairings, contrary motion here as pairings, and then in this sense here with the pedal tone, we could say that this free counterpoint is moving in juxtaposition. So, what should we get out of this? To be honest, in my analysis of this piece, it was very difficult to find how the counterpoint was actually working in relation to integral serialism. And the best way that I could explain it was how I just did. And we're talking about the gestural analysis between movements and how Boulez, outside of just using these paired tetrachords inside of these multiple interval class equations, is now pairing movements formulaically without a strict form that he's adhering to, contrapuntally through certain intervals within harmonies that he's creating. And if there's anything to get out of it, we see that he moves from dissonance to consonance. I guess I could abbreviate dissonance this way. He moves between dissonance and consonance contrapuntally, fluidly, even inside of the context of integral serialism. And the main modem that he seems to use to do this is the augmented interval. And if you ask me, it's because there's a certain bit of ambiguity, and you'll excuse me rolling in my chair, but this ambiguity that I'm talking about, it comes from, if we look at this just from the perspective of the movement 1 gesture of the pedal point of E flat, and in relation to a dissonant harmony, such as to an augmented harmony, such as, and into the consonant harmony. So obviously this is if we're playing these chords homophonically, and what I had just played was this first section here. Even though obviously it's still within the context of the mod 12 arithmetic of serialism, he's using the augmented interval to be able to switch between consonants and dissonance contrapuntally, formulaically, and gesturally to move the piece in a way that is somewhat similar mathematically to the pieces of like pictographic composition of Ioannis Xenakis, which is kind of funny because according to my research, Boulez absolutely hated that guy. So something to think about. And also in my research, I found that Boulez was denied from some of the Paris conservatories quite a few times before he was accepted. And when he finally was accepted, he was accepted as a harmony student. And one of the classes that he actually not flunked out of, but totally hated and just decided to tell the teacher that he sucked was his fugal composition class. So he was not a fan of counterpoint at all. And even though he was using Webern in the Second Viennese School as a launching point for his integral serialism, he had a lot of hotly debated topics with them as well. And so analyzing the piece contrapuntally, literally in the face of everything he hated, was very interesting to see that the counterpoint here does not rely on the tetrachords. It doesn't rely on the multiple integral calculus that he was using. What it really relies on is the relationship between dissonant and consonant harmony. And I think that Boulez, towards the end of his life, when he was sort of regressing on his opinions of serial composition, was realizing that some of the things he was trying to escape could not anymore if he was operating in the 12-tone system, which is why some of the things he could have done with 11, or I could have done better with 13. Definitely things to think about, definitely things to digest. But I hope you enjoyed this presentation on counterpoint in the context of integral serialism, especially in some such rigorous as Pierre Boulez. And I'm sorry that we only got to do 2 systems, pretty much, or 3 systems of this highly complex integral serialism piece. But I would highly encourage you to listen to it and perhaps analyze it through the lens that Boulez had intended of serialism. But please let me know if you have any questions in regards to this, and I will continue to do some research on this. If there is any bit of counterpoint that could be analyzed in a more classical context. Anyway, enjoy your